How did you feel about that whole federal takeover that happened? I mean, we saw how you had kind of like spoke up about it, and then you was active, especially with the home rule that that had happened over at Congress, over on Capitol Hill. You was over there active in that. Like, how did
Well,
you
the
feel about those?
activism that I was doing when you see me at the down there at the Capitol, right? It wasn't just ultimately about home rule, but you got to defend home rule by way of if you got any other issues. Like for an example, my issue is not higher minimum wage. My issue is not get rid of the speed cam. My issue is not dog parks, bike lanes. My issue is juvenile justice first. Let me make this clear for people who don't know what's up with me. My issues and things that I fight for is juvenile justice first because I went to jail as a juvenile and didn't understand the system. And prison reform second because here in the District of Columbia, 90-some% of the people that go through the courtroom are black, and we're not even 90% of the population anymore. We're not even a bona fide strong 50% of the population for real, for real. So prison reform is always going to be something of that for me. I'm not an abolitionist say get rid of prison, but I believe that if you're going to administer the law, that the law should be administered fairly. That's a wish thing here, but that's what's up. So anyway, to go downtown, that's for people like me, right? Although I made parole, I got out of prison 10 years before your average guy from my generation that got out under laws such as IRA, which is the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act, which gives guys that had long sentences when they were young people a second chance to get back out. And the Supreme Court and science has agreed that you shouldn't throw a child or undeveloped mind away forever without revisiting it. It's not saying that they should get out. They need to get out. Like if you went to prison and you constantly fucked up, you're not even eligible for this. So with all the stuff with the Donald Trump takeover, the tough on law stuff, one of the laws that they were challenging, they weren't challenging it specifically. They were challenging it by way of other ways to attack home rule. And people who don't understand what home rule is an act of Congress. It's not technically a law, but an act of Congress is like a law because it put it in effect until they want to change it, right? The Home Rule Act of 1973 is an act of Congress that gave D.C. a form of what's autonomy for the average person, but it allowed D.C. residents, who are some of the most unrepresented people in the country by way of Congress. We have no say-so in Congress, but it gave D.C. a say-so in electing their own local officials, such as the mayor, city council. D.C. had just got the right to even have a school board in the 60s. Now, don't forget that the people in the District of Columbia couldn't even vote for the President of the United States until maybe 1965. So you got a lot of people got opinions about D.C., even people that's from D.C. that don't have a clue about what's going on. So a person that's from DC like me, a native, or a person like maybe like yourself that you venture here from somewhere else, but you live here. The laws and the rules when you hop in your car and you drive that apply to you, they come from down there. You know what I'm saying? Well, I'm not gonna say the federal rules. The local rules come from the Wilson Building, but home rule is at home rule is at the mercy of Congress. DC itself is at the mercy of Congress. For people who don't understand what I mean by that, in the United States Constitution, the first capital of the United States, although temporary and makeshift, was in New York. The second was in Pennsylvania. But a situation occurred with the Pennsylvania militia in Congress because just like right now, Congress is shut down. Imagine a congressional government shut down back in the day and they couldn't pay the Pennsylvania militia. The Pennsylvania militia was going to kick Congress' ass. Why? Because the Pennsylvania militia was the militia of Pennsylvania and Congress was in the state of Pennsylvania as a generosity. So one of the reasons why I don't think DC will ever be a state is because in the history of the United States, Congress can never get ran out of its federal district as it was ran out of Pennsylvania, which is why DC is the capital of the United States at this very moment. So that's a statehood conversation. I know people are not going to want to hear that, but in the United States Constitution, there's a safeguard in it that says Congress shall have sole authority. Sole authority might not be there, but shall have authority over the District of Columbia is written in the Constitution. Now, there are what you call amendments. Remember, the 13th Amendment granted freedom to people that was enslaved. An amendment is something that is changed. And like one of my relatives so fondly reminds me of that the same way that they created the 13th Amendment, they can create another amendment to repeal the 13th Amendment. But that's too deep. Nevertheless, I'm saying that they would have to repeal that part of the Constitution in order to do able to do the statehood and all the other things. So I'm getting too deep into stuff that I don't really get too much deep into with politics, but that's my issue with statehood. That's my issue with home rule. And without home rule, a lot of people like me, and I want to mention people who have, accomplished a lot in a short amount of time. People like Harleen Flowers, Mama Lou Stewart, Kareem McCraney, David Bailey, Coley Long. Like, it's too many of these Ira guys' names. Anthony Petty, James Carpenter. I don't like naming names because I know I'm going to leave somebody out. Mike Pete, but it's a bunch of guys. My man Vail, right? All these guys is home on Ira, right? And I do want to take, somebody might take offense to this or take issue with this, but I want to point out these guys, right? Most of these guys that I'm mentioning, these guys was gangsters. I ain't like, this me saying it. Like some of these guys was guys I grew up under. Some of these guys are guys I looked up to. Some of these guys are my age. Some of these guys are a couple years younger than me, like Halim and Mama Lou and them. They came in right after me in that super predator zone, right? But now I'm including myself, when we were in the streets and we were active in the 80s and the 90s, we weren't snatching purses with $8 in it. We wasn't snatching grandma's car at her little Hyundai at the gas station just because we needed a free car. If you go look at our charges, and we are more than our crimes. Shout out to my man Rob, right? Our stuff was piranha on piranha, shock on shock. And now to see a lot of these guys have returned to the streets, changed their life, and stayed on a consistent trajectory of positivity, I don't think that, the Republicans, because that's what they're making this into now, a Democratic Republican thing down there on the Hill. And I don't think the people that's staunch, tough on crime really should, be focused in on that. But that's in a fair world, bro. I'm conscious enough to know this ain't about being fair. I'm conscious enough to understand that this is about control. This is about immigration. Since you asked me about the takeover, this is about control. This is about immigration. This is about socking it to a Democratic city that would never support a Republican, whether it be Trump or someone else. DC votes democratically, which is another reason why I don't believe a Republican-held Congress will ever give DC statehood, because technically you're giving Democrats 2 more seats. Yeah. Even if they went with a plan, like some people may have never heard of this, but there's also been discussion of federalizing the federal part of DC and the federal government keeping that, and the residents that live in a part of DC that expanded to go to Maryland and be another county. They even suggested Douglas County, like Frederick Douglass. But you still end up giving Maryland more democratic power by putting it over there. So I ain't a political expert, but I do got my own understanding. You shouldn't have no opinions and convictions without research. Oh, I got a problem with 14 years old going to adult prison, but they already passed it. Like, it's just, they just got to sign it. And that is crazy. Why do I have a problem with that? I have a problem with that because why would you reverse all the work that the courts and science have already done just to wait to go back to court again for them to tell you that, we already told you, don't send 14-year-olds away forever. That don't make sense to me. Let me correct another thing since you asked, clarify. The death penalty in the District of Columbia is not new. The death penalty in the District of Columbia can only be enforced by way of federal law. That is not new. 848B on the RICO, the Kingpin charges that we just talked about, Wayne Perry, Anton White, Markey, New Street Crew, Kevin Gray, all these guys, David Wilson, Congress Park, all these guys had death penalty cases. Now, they certified. For people who don't understand what certified means, Lil Durk has a murder for hire case, okay? That is a death penalty eligible case. You know that? No U.S. attorney, which is Pam Bondi right now, certified him for death. Death is off the table. So, all this, you commit a murder in D.C., capital punishment, capital crime, capital murder, That's only for the feds, and you cannot do it by way of homicide by itself. Murder can only be charged in a federal court by way of another offense, such as kidnapping and murder, bank robbery and murder, armored car robbery and murder, drug dealing and murder. So I want people to not understand, people running around asking me and then telling me as if I don't know what's going on. DC repealed the whole local murder, death penalty murder thing sometime in maybe 81 maybe. It hadn't been used since maybe the 50s. Fact check all this, I'm putting you in the range, right? And in 1991 or 92, as the murder capital murder spiked, I was here, I was active, the National Guard came back then, I was out there, I was hustling right in their face. DC repealed it locally. I do want to put that out there about that death penalty. Anybody got any further questions, we can follow it up. I don't want to turn into no moratorium on the death penalty, but the death penalty in DC federally is not new.
Kind of following up on that, when you had got convicted, when you was 16.
Yeah, I was a kid. I was 16. I didn't convicted until 17, but the crime was committed at 16. I was arrested at 16. I was just sentenced at 17.
And capital punishment wasn't a thing back then in DC?
Not locally. Like, you do understand the difference between federal and locally, right?
Right.
For people who might not understand the difference in federal and local, even if you're not from a place like DC that's a district, so our laws and the way our civic system runs is a little different. It's like nowhere, it ain't a little different, it's unique. Nowhere else in the country is it like DC, not even in a territory like Guam or Puerto Rico. You know what I'm saying? Well, Puerto Rico is basically a state. They don't even consider it a territory, although it's not really a state. But nowhere else does it function like DC. So if you're from a state, let's use Virginia. You could catch a case in Virginia and go to U.S. federal court because federal law trumps all law. Federal law is the top law. But you can also catch a local case and go to state court and end up in their state prison system. In DC, you asked me, did not catch a murder at 16? I believe you asked. I did. But there's no death penalty for murder locally here, period. And I'm going to have to go back and get the specifics. I believe it was on the books until 1980. They may have repealed it. But DC hasn't executed anyone locally since something like 1957, even when there was an electrocution, a death penalty type of process. And I got to say this, since I'm talking history, DC Superior Court, which is our local court, was created in 1970. So in 1957, whenever this guy that got executed by way of a crime he committed in DC, and he was alleged, I ain't gonna say he alleged, he was convicted of killing a police officer. This can all be Google, you know this me talking. If this DC Superior Court was not in existence at the time, then that means he went to federal court for that murder and he still killed the police officer. So even in that situation, right? Because even in Superior Court here, you're still prosecuted by way of the United States Attorney's Office. DC's local attorney general only prosecutes family matters and kids cases, misdemeanors. So do you understand what I'm saying when I say that even that guy that got convicted in 57, even though he got executed, they said, and I hadn't read all the way in this case, maybe I'll cover that on like what I do, right? But there was no Superior Court anyway.